Welcome to the Yukon in North 61. Today I was going to talk about my very first firearm and the evolution that it went to until it was no longer made in the United States, and this of course is the Winchester Model 94. 1984 I went down to a place called Acme Hardware and bought in Saskatoon and bought my first centerfire firearm. It was a 30-30 Winchester, and I used that for the next 4 years until I got a 308. Once I got the 308 I sold my Winchester. And I sometimes missed it because they're handy. So here's a Winchester 94, a little bit different one. 6.5 pounds, 20-inch barrel, 6 rounds in a magazine, handy, comes up nice, like those open sights, they're just right on. I've actually gone from a peep sight back to open sights with a sourdough front, and I find it really fast. And this was Winchester's attempt to modernize a little bit the 94. Still had a top eject, so if you flip that open, the shells will go straight up. .375 big bore 94 ejection. They increased the strength of the receiver. I'm going to show you a close-up of that. And they rechambered it in a caliber called .375 Winchester, which was loaded at 50,000 feet per square inch. It had 2 bullets, a 200 grain bullet at 2200, a 250 at 1900, and you can actually load both of those bullets just a little bit faster. You can get the 200s up to 2250 easily, which is actually getting into treading on the ground of the .358 Winchester. But they never sold. And they were actually going to make a .408 Winchester on the same case, which would have been really interesting. And it probably would have been even a little bit more powerful. But because these never sold, they dropped that plan and they went a different direction. And the direction they went, 6 years later in 1984, was with the angle eject. It was still an XTR, it was still a big bore. So if you look at this one, it actually has a BB still in the serial number. So this is a .307 Winchester. They also made them in a .356 Winchester, and these were basically the .308 Winchester and the .358 Winchester made with a rim. The bullets seated a little bit deeper, lost about 100 feet per second, maybe a little more in the 20-inch carbine barrels. The barrel was much heavier. So this gun now weighs 7 pounds, plus with the scope it's an 8-pound rifle. You lost a lot of the handiness, and they cut some of that sidewall down, kept the big bore receiver strengthening, cut that sidewall down, rearranged the ejector extractor system so that now when you shoot that, these shells come out the side. It's the first time they did that, and that allows you to put a scope right central. So these are now easily scoped, and this one is scoped with a 1.5 to 5 power Vortex with the dead hole sight. So I can actually shoot this gun out to 350 yards, 400 yards maybe. It's accurate. This gun with the factory Hornady gets 160 bullets, 160 grain bullets into 1.25 inches, routinely 3 shots at 100 yards. I can't reload better than that, so I've started just buying factory ammo. The only thing I reload in it is the 170 grain Hornady bullets, or 170 Nosler partition bullets, because they are probably better for a moose. So they did that in 84, and they never sold. 86, I think they dropped the .375 totally. 1989, they dropped the XTR descriptor. 1992, they added a cursed crossbolt safety, and if you want to collect, stay away from those. Nobody wants them. And in 1997, 98 rather, The 307, 356 were dropped. They continued with the basic AE. They dropped the big bore action. And in around 2006, they moved their production. They stopped production in the United States, and now Morocco, Japan makes them for Winchester, I guess under some kind of contract. So it was a really, really good idea, but it failed. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the actual potential on the hunting field of these firearms. So that's part 2. Okay, I'm hoping you can see my chart here. I wanted to talk a little bit about how these concepts worked. So these were pre-FTX bullets, but how does the concept work today with FTX bullets? So the old 30-30 Winchester up there with 150 yard zero, it shoots the 160 FTX at about 2250 feet per second out of a 20-inch barrel. That bullet will stay to 1700 feet per second, which is the expansion limit. Below 1700 feet per second, bullets don't expand very well. So those bullets should expand out to 225 yards. It also keeps 1,000 foot-pounds when started at 2250 to 200 yards, 225 yards. So that means that old 30-30 has a caribou limit or a deer limit at 225 yards. Its range to 1,500 foot-pounds is only 75 yards. So I wouldn't really want to use it for anything like a moose past 75 yards, which means you're basically in a kind of a rough spot with moose. You're almost at bow range. When sighted in a 150, it drops 11 inches at 250. So with a ballistic reticle or a bit of knowledge about long-range shooting, it's easily a 250 yard, you can easily make 250 yard hits, but it's really only good for the energy to 225 yards, and it's only good for expansion to 225 yards. So a 30-30 with modern bullets is a 225 yard deer rifle. Not bad. Now the 307, it's firing that same bullet 300 feet per second faster at 2550. And what that means is it expands those bullets, and there's one of those bullets expanded. That's a 160 FTX, close range. They seem to hang together quite nicely. They're going to expand right out to 350 yards. And at 350 yards, they also have the 1,000 foot-pound limit. So we've gone from a 225 yard caribou rifle to a 350 yard caribou rifle. And 350 yards is about, that's a good practical range for caribou. You're not giving up much by using a 160 FTX and a 307 when you go caribou hunting. If you go to moose, and you want to get moose at 1,500 foot-pounds, you're limited to 190 yards rather. And that bullet is not really a moose bullet. It only drops minus 4.3 at 250 yards when sighted in at 200 yards. So easy to make hits to 250. Possible to make hits to 350 with a ballistic reticle, and possible to get caribou to the 350. If you turn to moose, I'd rather have a 170 partition. You can start that at 2,500 feet per second. It will expand to 250. It has 1,500 foot-pounds to 150 yards. So with a 307, you have a 150 yard moose rifle. Not bad. And the limitations, basically energy and expansion, but mostly energy. The energy drops off at 150, it'll still expand to 250. So could you kill a moose farther than that? Yeah, but 1,500 foot-pounds is a nice minimum. If we go to the 356 Winchester, with the 200 FTX at 2450, it will expand to 275 yards. So you have a 275 yard caribou rifle, because past 275 yards the bullets won't expand. I found this first with a 358 Winchester. I hunted caribou with that rifle, and I really didn't like the long distance killing power because it wasn't expanding bullets. And that 356 200 FTX bullet will only stay over 1,700 feet per second to 275 yards. So that's the limit. However, when you look at moose, So you've got less range for caribou than the 307. You've got a little more range for moose because it keeps on to 1,500 foot-pounds right out to 225 yards. And actually the 220 Spear has a really nice ballistic coefficient, so it actually could keep about the same range, and you have a little more bullet weight. So that's probably your a better moose choice, a worse caribou choice. Now the 375 Winchester, which I spent a lot of time on, it's a really interesting guy. But the problem with it is it starts so slow that it hits that 1,700 yard range at between 125 and 150 yards with the bullets you can get. Even if you could convince Hornady to make an FTX bullet, it would only start at 2,200 feet per second. It would have a little lower ballistic coefficient because it's got a little less sectional density at a 220 grain bullet than a 160 grain 30 or even a 200 358. So you're really not going to have expansion much past 175 yards, even if we made a mythical bullet. So that tends to be what limits this rifle. So you're limited to about 150 yards for caribou, where you can really get sure expansion, which is less than a 30-30. And I think people figure that out, and these 200 bullets are just so 200 grain bullets are just so short, they have a really poor ballistic coefficient. For moose, you got a little more range than a 30-30. You could go out to 125 yards. If they made that 220 FTX, you could go to 160, but they don't. So you're basically based to 125 yards, even with that big 255 grain Barnes. Although I would push it a little bit past 1,500 because it would have a lot of energy. It would penetrate well, but look where it loses at 1,600 feet per second, 125 yards. You really are a 125 yard moose rifle with a 375. It's better than 75 yards of a 30-30, but it's not as good as the near 200 yards with the 307 or the 225 yards of the 356. So the reason the 375 Winchester died the death is it's really got some real range limitations because of the slowness and the lack of bullet expansion. People argue, yeah, it's already starting at 375, but I find the bullet expansion really increases the killing speed. Could you kill stuff further than that? You could, but it's less satisfying. So there's some real limitations with that 375 Winchester. What I like about it is taking it on non-hunting trips or in really thick timber because it does have such good penetration. Here's a 255 grain Barnes original. They just seem to just go through a lot of stuff. And here's the old 250 yard Winchester PowerPoints, which you can't get anymore. They were a really good bullet. Here's a 200 grain Sierra. Really expands well. Be a heck of a deer gun to 150 yards with that bullet. But past that, I don't know how well they'd expand, and that expansion really helps with your killing speed. Why didn't I buy 356? Because it's a little bit better at distance than the 307 for moose. Because I have this guy, and that's my 348 Winchester, which beats the 356 Winchester, and I can buy it from the factory with those FTX bullets, and this shoots under 2 inches in my rifle, which is an original Model 71. So a little bit maybe more detail than you wanted, but that's the tale of the big bore cartridges.